Here in the suburbs, a lot of people have lawn services that mow their lawn and take everything away, or they mow their lawn and they put the clippings in bags and set them out by the curb for the yard waste service. If you have a garden and you are giving away your yard clippings, if you are taking your kitchen scraps, your vegetable scraps, and putting them down to the disposer, you are wasting one of the best free resources that you can use for your garden. Today I'm going to talk about composting, give you a look at my compost bins. It's not complicated, it's not hard. Anybody can do it. All you need is some space and a few simple ingredients. So let's get into it. In order to compost, you only need 4 ingredients. You need nitrogen, which is your green matter. That's your grass clippings, your kitchen waste. Those green plant materials, plant-based materials, are what give you your nitrogen. You need carbon, which is your brown materials. That's dried leaves, it can be wood chips, sawdust, and I'll talk about that in a second. You need those to help keep the pile in check. If you have just nitrogen, it'll heat up really fast. The nitrogen breaking down is what generates your heat, and then it'll eventually become mushy and can get septic. Along with those, you need oxygen. The oxygen is what helps to feed the bacteria, that helps to break everything down. And if you don't have the oxygen, then the middle of your pile will go anaerobic and it'll start to smell bad. If you ever dig into a compost pile and it smells like manure, that's what's happening, is that it's gone anaerobic and it's just rotting basically, rather than breaking down in a nice manner. And then finally, you need moisture to also help feed that bacteria. If your pile goes dry, it'll go cold and it's not going to break down as quickly. Now, a cold pile will break down eventually. If you just piled up carbon, if you had a pile of leaves, you're making leaf mulch, it'll break down. It just takes a lot longer. So I'm going to show you my system that I use for composting. There are many ways you can do it. You just have to bring those 4 ingredients together and keep the piles mixed so that you keep that oxygen in there. You can use the tumbler bins that you see. You can go buy them at the big box stores. I have used those in the past. They work okay. You can take pallets and make a little bin out of pallets to put your stuff in. Those are great because it lets lots of air come in through the sides. Or you can just put a pile in a corner of your backyard, or somewhere on your property. Make a pile. That works too. So however you put it together, you just got to get those 4 ingredients together, give it some time, 5th ingredient, time, and let it break down. Now what I do for my compost is I have 3 bins here. I use it as a progressive system. Some people, when they have bins like this, they let one bin sit and cook all the way through. So they have one bin that will sit, they'll stir it up once in a while, and wait until that bin is done. I have one bin that's my starter bin. That's where I put all my new materials. And as I put stuff in there, I layer it up. So as I cut the lawn, I'll throw in a layer of cutting. And then I'll throw in, if I have some dried leaves, I'll throw a layer of that on top. Or I may throw some wood chips in. Now when I add wood chips, I generally only use wood chips that have been sitting for a while and have already started to decompose. If you use new green wood chips, they can tend to suck the nitrogen out, and you just have to let them have time to break down. Sawdust is the same way. Sawdust is great in compost if you have time to let it break down. You don't want to add green wood chips that are not decomposed, or green sawdust that hasn't had time to break down directly to your soil. If you do that, it's going to pull nitrogen out of your soil, and your plants are going to suffer for that. That's my warning about using wood chips and sawdust. In compost, where you are going to give it time to break down, it can be great. Leaves are great, dried up material. Sometimes if I have some old straw, I'll throw that in, but you want that brown material. So layers, I've heard it called the lasagna method, just layers. And I throw in some green, throw in some brown, throw in some green, throw in some brown, and keep going. And I mentioned this before, if you throw all green material, throw all your grass clippings, just a big pile of grass clippings, it's going to get really hot, it's going to break down really fast initially, and then it's going to get real mushy and probably start to smell bad. So you got to have that brown material mixed in. I've seen some composters that as they add the brown material and the green material, they'll stir it up so it's all mixed through. So rather than layers, they have it mixed through. And if you want to do it that way, that's great. One benefit I can see with that is that your green layers, your grass clippings, are not going to get matted like they can when it's just one layer of all grass clippings. So no problem with that. And this is the point, that composting doesn't have to be a complicated, here's one way to do it, and if you don't do it that way, it's going to be all screwed up. You can make it work. I'll admit my piles, you know, I have these wooden bins. Sometimes they get a little anaerobic in the middle. I stir them up and try to rejuvenate that pile to overcome that. So I have my initial pile, I throw my fresh stuff in. My layers of green and brown, bring our kitchen waste out, our kitchen scraps of vegetable stuff. You know, bananas, we throw all our banana peels in there, throw all our coffee grounds in there, any other vegetable peels or leftovers after cutting up vegetables, all goes in there. One things we tend to avoid are things that would have viable seed that might survive through the compost pile. So if it's like melon seeds, we avoid putting those in there. The melon rind, yes. If it's a fresh tomato, we may not throw the whole tomato in there. Those seeds can last through a lot, and then you end up with tomatoes growing everywhere. Tomatoes tend to spread like weeds if you let them. So we're careful about that, but otherwise everything else goes in the bucket, and we put it out here on the pile. This pile cooks down. When it gets cooked down about halfway and the next bin is about halfway empty, we go ahead and combine those. So when this pile's cooked down, I need to add more stuff to it. I'll stir up the second bin first to get some air in there, and then I'll scoop the stuff from this first bin into the second one, on top of the second one, and let that cook for a while. You can see I've got the third bin is also full, and as they go, they're going to cook down slower. This first bin, I can pile this up over the top, and it'll be down to the edge of the bin within a day. But then as it cooks down, it decreases less and less as time goes on. That third bin is the nearly finished stuff. And that's the stuff I'm going to be putting onto the garden bed soon to get them prepared for winter. So we just move the stuff down. In the process of moving it down, it gets stirred up, it gets oxygenated. By the time we get to the end, we pull that stuff out. We've got nice, dark, rich compost. So that's the system. I'm going to get to work here because I've got to do some lawn mowing. So I'm going to clear out this bin, scoop everything over into the other, and keep our system going. As I mentioned before, it's important to make sure that your pile has water in it to help feed the bacteria and keep things cooking. But when you add water, you want to make sure that you don't over soak it. Okay, now don't over stress about this and don't overthink it, but you basically want your pile to be about as wet as a damp sponge. If it gets too wet, then it can go ahead and start to rot rather than really breaking down nicely. In this case, my second bin was a little dry despite some rain that we'd gotten recently, so I went ahead and wet it down before I put more stuff on top. These bins, when I put them into service, I cut the bottoms out of them so that the compost could rest on the ground. If I can get worms moving up into the compost, that's a bonus to help break it down even faster. But that also helps that moisture to drain out as needed. You still got to be kind of careful because the compost, being porous, being plant matter, it'll absorb and hold that moisture, and so it can stay pretty wet. The point being, we want to add water. Don't want to get it sopping wet, just like a damp sponge, like I said, but make sure it doesn't get too dry, otherwise it's going to slow down that decomposition process. I want to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoy this and find the information useful about composting, I would appreciate if you would go ahead and tap that like button. Thanks a lot. I've got a bee here on my camera.